basically we're in that little boat that's on a river, and there's a current, and you can't do anything about that current.
Yeah.
It's going there. So to me, free will is just steering your little egoic vehicle on that little river. And yeah, for sure you're gonna have, I think you're gonna have choices to make once in a while, like bifurcations and stuff like that. But mostly it's just not crashing on
Right.
the anyway. So I kind of digress, but so yeah, like this idea of the will within magic, especially when it's kind of I'm gonna pronounce that badly, collaborative.
Collaborative. Yeah. Yeah.
Collaborative, yeah, because you're interacting with entities, and I'd like to get back to this notion of entities further down
Sure.
the river. But uh, what's the place? What is the
will?
place of free will in your own practice? Is that a bad question? Like, just
no, not at all. Because it
with
gets asked. Because people, again, when people come to magic, a lot of times the things that will pop up, that will rise up for the very beginning, will be the definition of magic is given by Aleister Crowley, which is that magic is the oh God, it's been so long since I've said it, because to me it's just such a boring quote, but it's causing change, to cause real physical change in conformity with one's will. His whole style of magic, and for people that don't know, was called thelema, which is, I believe it just translates into Greek as will. I could be wrong, but it's this idea of it, and his conception of will was very 19th century, very Nietzsche, and very, and there are discussions to have for will. As far as my take on will and how it works with magic is that that's one question that I don't even think is very interesting. And I'm not saying that your question isn't interesting. It's just that I don't really, I waffle back and forth as to whether or not there actually is free will, as an actual conception of free will is. Like, am I one who is constantly making decisions all the time? Because a lot of things like magic and astrology, some astrology doesn't have place for things like will, or sometimes it does. Some magic does have place for will, sometimes it doesn't. So I always waffle back and forth, because there's things that are indicators to me that are just like, oh man, are we really just automata going through this weird cycle until we rebirth again? Like the time is actually not just a river, but it's like a corkscrew going through, and that there's these cycles that we can see when we stare at a certain part of the curve through space-time, and you can get really crazy with it. It can get really weird. And then there's part of me that's like, no, there has to be free will. My answer is that I don't really know. It's one of the least interesting aspects of magic to me, because I just kind of do things. Am I the one? I don't really think about, am I the one who, is this what I really want? Is this my true will? It seems like one of the least interesting aspects of the process of doing magic itself. But what I will say is that Eric Wargo released this book called Time Loops, in which he talks about how a lot of phenomena that we call paranormal can be explained through causation, through time, and that we really are entities of a four-dimensional space that can see parts of the future through things like dreams and things of this variety. And then, so there's part of me that's like, man, Eric Wargo is very right in this. And then there's this other aspect in another author who I've really enjoyed by the name of Gary Lockman, who wrote a book called Dreaming Ahead of Time, in which he takes his position from J.B. Priestley, who is a playwright and a very interesting author, who also talks about time, but with an added element of free will, in that there's like, I think there's like four, and he uses a river analogy as well. There's like four different aspects of us There's one that like stands on the shore and that can like see everything that's happening.
Yeah.
There's one that's already in the boat that can do the steering, and then there's like this aspect of us that is like the river itself, as just we can't change certain aspects, and this strange interplay between all of them. But I find it really spooky that, and this is an experiment that has stood up to replication, is that when we're asked to do somebody did an experiment where we were asked to do certain tasks like push a button, and that we had all of these electrodes hooked up to us to be able to know when we were going to make this decision. And we saw that the action took place before the thought did. That's a spooky, like that's something that, why isn't everybody talking about this? That we are doing things before we actually have the thought to happen. Does that mean our instruments are fucked? Does that mean like truly, this is something to absolutely sit with. So the question of will for me, because it's so ingrained within magic via people like Aleister Crowley, whose whole magic was about will and to meet this entity that will tell you your true will. I don't know. It seems that seems so stuck in a certain period of time for me, that the question is one of the least interesting aspects of magic itself. And truly, I do think that magic is most about enchanting your life and the world around you and trying really weird stuff. The truth is, I don't know if we have free will. I hope we do. And that's an honest statement. Part of me really hopes that in some way we're able to help navigate this weird boat that we're on. But I also wouldn't be surprised if we don't. Truly, I wouldn't be surprised if some aspect of this is already set up and we're just some kind of weird actors on a stage that something else has set for us. But this question used to be very pertinent to me, and it no longer is. It's kind of one of the least interesting aspects of doing this stuff. So I've made a very long answer out of this question, but I think for people that are interested in this kind of stuff as far as magic, read Eric Wargo's book, Time Loops. It's very fascinating, and he has some interesting perspectives there. Not all of them, which I'd agree with, particularly his aspect of jouissance and avoiding catastrophe, being able to allowing us to see these time loops when they occur. But also read Gary Lockman's, and the book wasn't written as a rebuttal to Eric Wargo. In fact, he kind of just brings up Eric Wargo over 3 pages and time loops. But how Gary Lockman sees the idea of time as and will and these kind of things through the eyes of somebody like J.B. Priestley, very fascinating stuff. But I hope this doesn't sound pompous, Dominic, but it's just the idea of will to me is not an important one in my magic. Other people who I do admire, people like Peter Gray, who is the founder of Scarlet Imprint. He writes a lot about Thelema and Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and Babylon and things like this. He definitely has things to say about will and a more nuanced conversation that can be had that stands outside of the 19th century conceptions of free will, which really truly shackle magic, I believe, contemporary magic to this day. That my job with my podcast is to try and grind 19th century conceptions of magic into the dirt because that's what people are being offered as this is what magic and the occult is. And my podcast exists to show you that it's not. So yeah, I think a lot of the way in which we think about magic, truly, actually, a lot of ways in which we think about the world comes from the latter half of the 19th century. And we're still crawling out of a very deep hole as far as how we view things like colonialism, spirit, what is and isn't alive, and epistemology, and all of these things. Yeah.
Yep.